Well, 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 looks like it's happening in West Africa. It was once said that a revolution is impossible without a revolutionary situation. Furthermore, not every revolutionary situation leads to revolution. Let's talk. Hi, Garland here, and Africa is undergoing a very interesting time, revolutionary time, one could argue. Um, and what's happening in West Africa is interesting, and what caused it, what created the dynamics that caused the people in West Africa to revolt. Um, let's talk about that. I do believe that this is directly tied to the conflict in Ukraine, that the destabilization in the world is tied to the Ukraine conflict. And when I say destabilization, people take that to mean to interpret in a pejorative sense, because traditionally when we say destabilization, unstabilized things, that means it can be bad. It's usually viewed at as something is unstable, it's dangerous, it's unpredictable. Those kind of words go with instability, right? Which is true. However, I'll put it to you like this. And Malcolm X has said, Malcolm X said a lot of very interesting things. And one of the things that he talked about, he used to always use the metaphor of a slave plantation. And one of the metaphors that he used was, and because it works so well with the situation of class, of economic class, of political, cultural class, etc., caste systems. And basically, he said on a slave plantation, there were the house slaves who had it better, and of course the field slaves who barely got some gruel, were beaten every day and worked 25 hours a day, etc. And he said that he spoke of, if someone came to the house slave and said, let's run away, this house slave would say, come on, man, I'm living pretty good, why would I? Right? No thanks, I ain't going nowhere. And if they went to the field slave, he'd say, any place is better than here. And I think that's such an appropriate analogy in so many instances, and particularly here, because I believe when we look at the U.S. empire, right? The U.S. empire has a caste system, has a class system, right? A system of power. And of course, at the top is, the neocons, the elite ruling class in Washington, D.C. Now, the elite ruling class in the UK like to believe that they're a part of this ruling class, and they may very well be. But in the empire system, you have the US empire, you have Europe, right? And then you have the rest of the world that, these countries live off of. Now, I would classify it from the Malcolm X analogy like this, and that would be the US is the master, the ruling elite and the people of Europe will be the house slaves, and the people in the global south will be the field slaves, for the purpose of that kind of analogy. Right now, the people in Europe don't, the elite ruling class know that they're the house slaves, but the people of Europe do not understand that dynamic. They think they're on equal footing. They think they're viewed on equal footing as the way the Americans, to be quite frank, and even the British view themselves, but they're not. They're still seen as slaves. They're still seen as a commodity. And here's the evidence. The United States feels threatened because Russia and China and several other countries are growing, are on the move, are expanding their power, and are becoming independent. So the U.S. has to sacrifice something. It has to, you get mad, and he gets mad and it beats one of its slaves. Well, the house slave, though the house slave lives well, though the house slave gets to eat the master's food and gets to sleep in the master's house and stay warm and have heat and things of that nature, they're still expendable. They're still a commodity. They're still chattel. And in the event that the master needs to sell a slave or something, he may sell a house slave. So a house slave could, if you think of the slavery analogy, I think it's the perfect analogy for the empire, because the master could say, okay, I want to sell a slave and sell a house slave. And that house slave could go somewhere else and become a field slave there and lose all of its overnight, lose all of their privileges. And the master doesn't care. Hey, man, I had to get rid of you. I needed some money. For whatever they say, they needed money. They lost money in a bet, whatever. They needed some money. They sell a few house slaves. They get the money back. The house slave is expendable, just like the field slave. But at the current time, it benefits the master to have those house slaves there, right? That's all Europe is. They're house slaves. That's all they are. Nothing more, nothing less. They still have existed by the grace of the masters in Washington, D.C. And now that the masters feel a bit threatened, they're going to dispense with the house slaves. They're going to use the house slaves for whatever they need for their benefit. The house slaves, in their mind, feel as though they have greater privileges than the field slaves. So they believe that in the eyes of their master, they're courtiers, right? They hang around the king. And hopefully in the eyes of the king, because they hang around the king's court, they'll be viewed on a higher level. They'll get more privilege than the people that are not in the court. The house slaves get more privileges than the field slaves. And so these house slaves in Europe think that, hey, man, we get more privileges, therefore we're viewed from a higher perspective. They're not. And now that the U.S. feels threatened, now that the master feels threatened, the U.S. is just as happy to dispense with its house slaves in France, Germany, wherever, as it is with the field slaves, which would be, in the global South. So the one of the things that's going on now in Ukraine is the U.S. is squeezing it's the neoliberal model, the neoliberal capitalist model. It's a the type of capitalism that the United States has morphed or has evolved, whatever you call it, into a neoliberal capitalist model. And this model is extremely flawed. And this model is in economic collapse. It's in economic collapse, and they understand it. So what they're doing is they're simply sacrificing the house slaves. They're selling off the house slaves. They're selling off and sacrificing the Europeans. They're sacrificing everything about them. No longer do you have the illusion in Europe that you're a sovereign or independent nation. No, you can't have that illusion anymore. It's not necessary. It's not needed. And so, no, you'll do what you're told, and that's that. And your master and your ruling elite class understand it, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to do what they're told. Well, meanwhile, one of the things that has happened because of the additional economic pressure, there's so many angles where you can go get from Ukraine to Africa, but one of them is, as the U.S. puts pressure on its vassals in, the house slaves in Europe, they have to use any means they have to try to make their lives better, to try to get more money. So one of the things France has been forced to do is tighten the screws on its colonial vassals in West Africa. The fact of the matter is, France is not a wealthy nation. It's been living off of West Africa. It's been taking the gold and the uranium. The reason that everybody's like, well, France is not the same as Germany and some of these other countries. When they get cut off from cheap energy, they're suffering and they're getting deindustrialized. When they're cut off, these other countries are cut off from Russia's cheap energy, they become deindustrialized because they don't have another option for cheap energy. Whereas France is using nuclear energy, right? And so they're not hurting as bad as some of these other countries. They're still hurting, but not as bad. And they can make it through the winter better because blah, blah, blah. But why does France use so much nuclear energy? Because they're robbing West Africa blind of uranium, because they have countries that they dominate. They have these colonial countries and they steal their stuff. And one of the things that the things that there's a lot of in West Africa is uranium. Mali has uranium. Niger has uranium. Gabon has uranium. So they can get uranium. They just steal it from the Africans and use it. And they have cheap energy, almost free energy, right? So they've been able to survive and be okay because they're robbing Africa. They've got gold. France has lots and lots of gold, but France doesn't have any gold mine. What do? They steal it from West Africa. And one of the things that has happened as the Ukraine conflict and the subsequent sanctions that were placed on Russia make it more difficult and more expensive for European countries to acquire the natural resources that they need to maintain their industry and to maintain just their a quality of life. It has forced France to tighten the screws on its West African countries, right? And in doing that, it has made the people restive. The people in West Africa, they knew they were getting screwed, but now they're looking around saying, well, this is pretty messed up, man. You're tightening up on us, down on us. You're making us work harder. You're taking more of our stuff and we're still getting nothing. So part of the dynamic is that France has been forced to tighten the screws on West Africa because it can't get cheap energy and some of the resources it needs from Russia anymore. It has to turn to West Africa and squeeze them tighter. Man, much, West Africa. You got to work harder in the mines. You got to give us more stuff, which means you're going to have to live worse off. Meanwhile, due to issues of foodstuffs, issues of fertilizer, driving up the cost of food, the lives of the people in West Africa, their lifestyle is deteriorating. And think about this, if you're in France and you're here and your life deteriorates to here, that ain't so good. But if you're here and you're so close to the bottom, if you hit the bottom, you won't make a sound, and then you hit the bottom, you're not going to be happy. So the Ukraine conflict, in creating an economic problem for Europe, and in particular France, created an environment where France had to tighten down. See, keep in mind, that's how imperialism and colonialism works. The US empire tightened the screws on Europe. You got to buy our stuff. You got to pay more. We're going to, you got to buy more weapons. You got to come up with more money. We're going to take you to the cleaners. So as the US reaches down and tightens the screws down on Europe, if Europe has somebody to tighten the screws down on, they're going to do it too. And it just so happens that France does. As somebody to tighten the screws, it tightens the screws down, and the West Africans feel the heat from all different directions, and they ain't happy. Now, let me add another thing, and I think it's critical to look at the dynamic of power in the world. Over the past, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. has been the preeminent power, right? They've been the unipolar, whatever the hell you want to call it, right? They've been a preeminent power, and they have been callous. They have been arbitrary and capricious with their power and the use of force and economic sanctions and coercion and manipulation. They've been reckless and callous and brutal. And Africa has felt the pain of that elbow smash to the face from the U.S. empire over and over and over. And everyone looked at the U.S. empire and they saw them bomb, or they saw them overthrow Libya. They saw them overthrow Iraq. They saw them overthrow Afghanistan, and people were afraid. They saw this guy beating up on everybody, right? They see this big U.S. beating up on everybody, and they're scared. And they're like, man, they got smart bombs, they got planes, they got all this kind of stuff. Nobody dares to challenge them. Okay. Ukraine was something that a new dynamic came up. And in this new dynamic, the U.S. said to Russia what it said to everyone else, right? Hey, you better do what we're told. So the U.S. goes to Libya, wherever the hell. Hey, we're overthrowing your governments if you don't do what we tell you to do. And then you know what? Even if you do what we tell you to do, we're overthrowing them anyway, just because we can. So they tried that with Russia. Hey, Russia, you better do what we tell you to do. We're going to surround you with bases. We're going to overthrow Ukraine. We're going to fill it with missiles. We're going to threaten you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Russia sent a note in December of 2022. And this letter to the U.S. said, you better get your act together in Ukraine or on our border, or some bad things are going to happen, bruh. Bad things are going to happen. And as they said, there could be a military technical response. And everybody went, ooh, crap. Nobody says that to the United States. Now, keep in mind, there was an incident that had happened before then that was kind of let us know that things were changing. After the death of General Soleimani, Iran struck back against the U.S., struck back with weapons, with ballistic missiles, and the U.S. got hit, and there were soldiers that got injured, and the U.S. didn't do anything, didn't fight back. The Iranians shot down an unmanned U.S. drone, which is redundant, unmanned drone. You get the picture. They shot down a U.S. drone. U.S. didn't fight back, right? Didn't do anything. And the reason that the U.S. didn't do anything is because they knew they were going to take a nasty punch. They knew, yeah, we may be able to defeat Iran, but do we really want to do that? Iran's going to close the Straits of Hormuz, and I don't know how much you know about the energy futures market, but they're going to the derivatives market, what, a 10 or 11 trillion dollars derivatives market, would be shut down. And not to mention, the Iranians had the capacity to strike U.S. bases all throughout the Middle East. So did the U.S. really want to take a bite of that apple? Apparently not. So the countries saw that, but they also saw Iran kind of say, look, we're going to hit the base and we're going to hit this base right here. So they kind of gave the U.S. a warning of what they were going to do. So it wasn't a big punch. It was a shove back against the U.S., but it wasn't a punch. The Russians said, not only are we not going to do what you want us to do, you're not going to surround us with bases and then overthrow Ukraine and start putting missiles in it. That ain't happening. It's not happening. We want to talk to you about it. And the U.S. said, nah, that's not even a starter. And Russia said, well, in that case, we'll do it ourselves. If you can't clean Ukraine out from Nazis, if you can't do what needs to be done in Ukraine, then we'll do it. So Russia then showed that they were a world power, and Russia showed that they were not afraid to tangle with the U.S. And the rest of the world saw that, and they're like, man, this is something. Somebody's going to punch back at the U.S. empire. And of course, being that it was a proxy war, being that, and here's the other part, Russia has the capacity to annihilate the United States. Do not be misled. That is in the minds of neocons. They're cowards and they don't want to die. Russia has the capacity. If you punch them too hard, if you push them too far, they have the capacity to put you to sleep. So Russia said, hey, look, man, we're in for no foolishness now. And at the very beginning of the war, Russia punched. And then, I don't know if you remember this, Vladimir Putin said that he was going to put his nuclear deterrent system on full alert. So Russia punched, and then they coiled, just like a doggone, snake, coiled back with all their poison ready, saying, look, we don't want this to go bad. We're going to knock Ukraine out. If you step to us, you better be right, because otherwise you're dying. You're all dead. You may be able to hurt us. You may be able to kill us, but ain't none of you walking away from this. So you better make a decision. Russia, very early in the game, put their nuclear deterrent system on alert, and the U.S. knows. Man, they got hypersonic missiles. They got all kinds of stuff. You do that, you're dead. It's suicide. You might as well stick a gun in your mouth. So the U.S. backed off and said, let's do this proxy war thing. And Russia said, let's dance. And the world is watching, and they're seeing that Russia is an effective fighting force. They're seeing that for all of its bluster, a lot of the U.S. weapons aren't all they're cracked up to be. A lot of U.S. weapons are being destroyed. Patriot missiles, what they turn them on, the Russians blasted them with hypersonic missiles in an hour. They turn them on, they blow them up. They turn them on, they blow them up. So they could see, wow, Russia has some nasty missiles, and they ain't afraid to fight. And they saw, basically what the world saw was the U.S. is all mouth. As they say, an alligator mouth and a Tweety bird ass. They'll talk, but when it comes down to it, they ain't going to risk everything. They ain't going to risk everything, and they know they're risking everything if they try to fight Russia. And B, that they're up against a tough opponent who's willing to fight, who ain't afraid to fight. I had a friend of mine, and you might have heard me tell this story before. Funny guy, funniest person you ever know. We used to go fishing a lot together, and this guy's a piece of work. Hilarious. Everybody loves this guy, but to understand him, I'll tell you a story. You might have heard this story from me before, but I think it's important. So he worked up in Philadelphia for this, what was it? A construction company. And the construction company was, let's face it, let's be square, it was owned by the mafia. And there was like 5 guys who were mafia men who would come down to the construction site. They'd go around, they'd bully people, they'd, push people around, they would, curse people and dominate people and just kind of show their strength, and then they'd leave. So one day, he was, and this guy, you got to know him. He ain't that kind of guy. So apparently one day he was working or whatever, and one of these guys decided that they were going to confront him and I guess, show how tough they were. And he got in an argument with one of them. Needless to say, right off the bat, the other four came, they surrounded him, and they were basically going to intimidate him, saying, we're going to kick your ass. And his position was, come on, I'll fight all four of you. That was his position. And you got to know this guy. I got to tell you, that's the kind of guy he is. This is a person, he ain't afraid of a fight, and he ain't afraid to lose a fight. So when they came up, yeah, you expected him to back down. He balled his fist and said, bring it. I'll take all. He wasn't afraid of losing a fight. He was going to throw some punches in, right? And he said they stopped, and they started laughing. And they said, we like you. You're all right guy. And they took him with them to, come on, let's go. And they went drinking and hung, and he was their buddy. He was their boy, right? Why? Because they respected him. A lot of people respect somebody like that. A lot of people, if three guys surround the guy, say, we're going to kick your ass. And the guy says, bring it. Let's go. People will be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, that guy's got a pair, right? A lot of the tough guys that are like been in bars and hung out and stuff before know what I'm talking about. There may be people right here that have been in that position where people surround them and say, let's come on, we're going to jump you. And the guy says, bring it, man. I ain't scared of losing a fight. I ain't scared. I've lost fights before. I've won fights before. But you better be ready, because I'm going to bite, scratch, punch, kick, and do everything I can. And I may lose, but it ain't going to be happy for none of us. But I ain't afraid to fight. People respect that. So the bottom line is, I say all that to say Vladimir Putin said, let's dance. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. And so people then saw that the U.S. empire wasn't what they thought it was. They thought it was just this dominant, unshakable power that nobody would dare confront. And the Russians said, look, we're the Russians. Hitler, Napoleon, we've been down this road before. We've dealt with unshakable world powers that were on there, and they stepped to us and they fell. You want to step to us? Sure. And now we got nukes. If you think you can beat us, in fact, what Vladimir Putin said at one point was, look, if all of the countries in NATO decide that they're going to put all of their power and money and military might together to fight us, we might not be able to win this. But your ass is grass. We might not be able to win this, but then it's really going to get ugly. Because if you guys confront us and it gets to the point we can win, we'll kill every one of you. We'll kill every one of you, every last one of you. There won't be a blade of grass left. So if that's what you want to do, let's do it. And so what you see is people, and I've talked about this before, in the developing world, in the traditional world, right? In the Muslim world, in Africa, in these traditional societies, saying, man, that dude right there has got a pair. That guy right there, man. All right. And then they looked at the U.S. and they're like, I don't even know what your pronouns are, dude. Here, this guy is putting foot in your ass, and you're telling me I'm using the wrong pronouns. You're not tough. We thought you were tough, but you ain't tough. You're sitting over here arguing over pronouns, and he's beating the hell out of you. He's throwing punches. So forget it. You stick with the pronouns. We're going to stick with this dude over here that's throwing punches. That's what happened. And now the U.S. has no respect whatsoever in the developing world. And so what happened with Africa? Well, number one, as I said, France starts putting the screws to them, and the people start getting upset. Then the people start asking questions because they're getting froggy. They're starting to get upset. And the people of Africa, Ibrahim Traore asked a question. I've said this, the Burkina Faso leader, and he's, love the guy myself. I mean, he seems to be picking up the mantle. He seems of Thomas Sankara. He seems to be saying, let's, I'm not afraid. Let's go. Let's fight if we have to. And, he asked the obvious question. And man, once that question was asked, there ain't no way to put that genie back in the bottle. Because he said, why is it that we're going around the world begging and we're the richest people here? We got gold, we got copper, we got timber, we got coffee and bananas, we got everything, cobalt that the world wants, uranium, we got everything. We should look at the Saudis. The Saudis got gold and they're walking around living good. Where they got oil, black gold, Texas tea, as they say, right? And they're saying, but look what we got, more than any of these countries have. And we're going around begging. Ain't happening no more. And so they what did countries start doing one by one? They looked Niger, they looked at France, and they're like, dude, you're robbing us blind. Tell you what, that ain't happening no more. What happened with here in Gabon? What happened? They looked at it, and no, let me add this. And what happened in Niger? The military overthrew the government. And then what do we hear from the West? Oh my God, it's a coup, a coup. They coup country after country after country. Oh no, a coup. We can't believe there's a coup. This injustice must not stand. And the people in Niger are like, screw you, get out. You friggin' French maggot, take you, your friggin' beret, and your baguettes, and you get the hell out of our country. It's our stuff, not yours. Leave. We want to live good. You're living good off of our stuff. You lazy welfare bastard. Those days are gone. It's our stuff. We're gonna live good. You go back to France and do what you got to do. We're willing to fight. They saw what happened in eastern Ukraine, and they said we're willing to fight. And Ibrahim Traore, again, Captain Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso, said, keep in mind, he's young. And he's seen his young life. He's seen nothing but oppression, nothing but mistreatment, nothing but theft of resources from France. And he said, saying to the young people of Africa, we got to be willing to fight. What kind of future do we have? What kind of future do we have? They're robbing us. Are we going to be poor forever? We might as well fight and die. Basically, if we're going to fight, if they're going to, I'll put it like this. Basically, what he's saying is you might get these resources, but you're going to have to fight to get them. You're not just going to come to this country and we're going to have some puppet in power and hand them over to you. You might get them. I'm not saying you ain't going to get them, but they ain't going to be cheap. It's going to cost you lives continuously. And when the people in Niger said, we're in, the people of Burkina Faso said, we're in, the people of Mali, of Gabon, the people in Gabon, think about this. What happens today? The government, excuse me, the military in Gabon overthrows a family. Basically, France and the US had this family, right? And these people, it was the son, it was the father before, now the son. They're filthy, stinking rich in this little country of 2 million people that has lots of resources. And they're living with mansions and wealth, and they're handing everything over to the French. Bottom line, they're just traitors. They're just quislings, right? Kind of like I don't know, Olaf Scholz, right? So they're doing kind of like the quisling leaders in Europe, right? So the people of Gabon were in the streets dancing, congratulating, thanking these people. See, some people may call it a coup. Other people may use the term armed struggle. That it was an armed. Some people may say, "Oh, it was a coup by the military." Some people might say it was an armed struggle. If it was a coup by the military, which it appears that it was, what happened was they had an election, and at the end of the election, as usual, the leader of the country said, "I won." Again, my father won over and over. I won over and over, and I just won again. And apparently the military said, not this time, buddy. Not this time. It's over. This game is over. So they grabbed him and they locked him up, and they talked about trying him for treason. And and what's happening in Niger? They're talking about potentially trying the ex-president for treason. There is a I would think there's something that happened in Latin America the last few years that's comparable. If you look at what happened in 2019, Bolivia, the United States, and its partners overthrew the government of Bolivia because they got lots of oil, like 40% in the world or something insane. Right now, the known lithium mines, and which are used for batteries and electric cars, right? And they overthrew Evo Morales, and they put in this woman, and she was a complete fascist kook, and shooting down protesters, things of that nature. And the movement of the political and cultural and social movement that put Evo Morales in power took to the streets. They shut down the country, and they ended up nabbing her, locking her up, trying her, giving her some time in jail, and convicting her, putting her in jail, and getting their people back in power as best they could. So there is a precedent for that happening. And what's interesting is this is not the traditional coup. The traditional coups, they come in and they just put a bullet in whoever the old president is. These people are much more practical, and it's not a violent coup. They didn't go machine gunning people. They just said, we're the military, you're the president. Guess what? We got guns, you don't, you ain't president no more. They could have shot him, hung him, did him. But the thing about it is, I think too, By not killing him, they have a bargaining chip. Because one of the things that the coup government in Niger did, the transitional government, as they call it in Niger, they said, hey, we got your boy. We got your boy right here. You want to see him? Yeah, we want to see him. Boy, you can't. But I tell you what, if you invade us, if you attack him, we're going to put a bullet in him. He's dead man. So to some extent, when they take these, puppet quislings, it allows them to kind of, I'm not going to say hold them for ransom, but let's just say in the term in international geopolitics that I'm sure you're familiar with is called leverage. Leverage. And so they hold them and they use them as leverage. But I think that the people in Africa, when the screws were tightening that down to them by the Europeans, and B, when they saw what happened in Ukraine. Look, one of the things that you're seeing, you realize it is our time. It's interesting because the U.S. be careful what you pray for. You might just get it. It's clear if you read the recent writings by U.S. Geopolitical leaders, thought leaders, it's clear that the U.S. was overthrew the government of Ukraine and was preparing Ukraine for this war. And this was the plan. They're going to utilize Ukraine as a blunt object to beat Russia over the head with, right? Or actually, they felt that they were sharpening it up like a razor blade to slice Russia to pieces with. That's a more accurate analogy. And man, is this thing backfire. It's costing them everything. France is done. France is done. What is France going to do? Country after country, keep an eye on Senegal. Keep an eye on some of these Guinea-Conakry. Keep an eye on some of these other countries. I think, let me see something. I had written down some notes earlier, and I might have, if you give me a second. No, I was reading some things earlier, but the bottom line is, that the countries in West Africa are in revolt against their colonial masters. And once, I believe, Ibrahim Traore said, ask the question. The question, sometimes it's a question that is more powerful than anything. It's putting a question in somebody's mind. Like somebody's getting abused by their significant other, and somebody says to them, man, why do you let that person treat you like that? And it never dawned on them. They're just treated like crap. And somebody says, why do you allow that person to treat you like that? You can do better. And they're like, I never thought about it like that. Or they ask them a question. They're like, never dawned on me. And you can't put that genie back in the bottle. And when the person mistreats them, they're looking at him and they're thinking, why do I put up with this? And before you know it, the situation falls apart and they're out the friggin' door, right? Because once the question is asked, it must be answered. And now that the question is asked, why is it that we have, think about that. You're sitting there and you got a bag of money, you got gold, you got diamonds, you got everything you could possibly want, and you are in poverty, and you're looking at this bastard over here spending your money. And it's happening for generation after generation, century after century. You get used to it, and it goes on, and you're poor. You're working in the mines. Your children are working in the mines. You're being abused. You don't have electricity. You don't have running water. You're just trudging back to the mine, trudging back home. And one day somebody stops you, taps you on the shoulder, boink, 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 and you're like, yeah, I got a lot of time. I got to go back to the mines. I got a question for you. And you're like, what? Those mines are owned by your country, right? Yes, as a matter of fact, they are. They got diamonds, yeah, and right up the streets, gold. Yeah, how about oil? We got plenty of it. Copper, nothing but copper. You getting copper? We got copper. We're falling over copper. Nickel, love it. Cobalt, plenty of it. Uranium, yeah, there's 5 uranium mines within a mile of my house. We got all that stuff. And the guy looks at him and says, then why are you living in dire poverty, abject poverty? And the people over there across the sea they're living pretty damn well off of your stuff. Just throwing that out there. And the guy says, yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. And when he goes home, it haunts him like a ghost. When he goes to work, he's digging in the mines, and there's a big pile of gold. It's like That's my damn gold. Why the hell are these people living good off my damn gold? He puts it in a bucket. He picks up, and every little piece of gold he picks up, he looks at it, he says, that's my damn gold. Because the question that hadn't really dawned on him was put on him, and it haunts him like the ghost of Marley. He can't get away from it. And at some point, somebody sticks their fist up and yells, revolution. At some point, somebody turns their beret around backwards. And I guess in Africa they're all waving Russian flags now. That's kind of the but interesting. It's kind of like says revolution, right? But at some point, somebody screams revolution, and then they're like, "Yeah, I want some of that. I'll get revolution. Yeah, these sons of bitches, they ain't getting away with this anymore." Abraham Traore comes in and he says, "Hey, man, I can't respect you." What did he say? I don't respect a slave that won't revolt. If a slave doesn't revolt, he doesn't deserve pity. He's saying, if they've got you enslaved, don't sit there and work in the mines. If you're going to die in the mines, die fighting these bastards, right? He stand up and be a man, And I guess you can't even say that in the West anymore because they don't want to tell you what the definition of a man or a woman is. Who knows? They got 50 genders, but in Africa they only got 2. So it's easy. Stand up and be a man. And he's like, I'll stand up and be a man and take to the streets. And they're taken to the streets. Next thing you know, the military is like, hey, we're overthrowing the president. And the people are in the streets. They're honking horns. They're waving Russian flags. And they understand. They understand that when you fight City Hall is going to fight back. But they also understand that when you come together, right? When you come together, that it's very, very difficult for people. It's a lot easier to beat up one guy. So now when you go there, you got to beat up Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger and Gabon and on and on and on. And it's getting to the point where what is the US and France going to do? Attack 5, 6, 7 African countries all at the same time, overthrow them. And then what happens? Let's just say you're able. See, the question is there. They understand what's happening with these puppets for the US or France. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, France goes in. They bomb the Niger. They're able to take the country back, and they're able to put some puppet leader in. I wouldn't want to be that puppet leader, because if he turns his back, his throat is cut. His car is bombed. His machine gunned. Let me ask you this. I don't know how much you know about the history of the Soviet Union and how it provided arms and things of that nature to the revolutionaries during their struggle for independence in Africa. But what the hell do you think is going to happen if, let's say, France and Niger, Mali, Gabon, etc., they go in there, they're able to bomb stuff, and they're able to take over again, right? What do you think is going to happen? The people are going to be ready for armed struggle. You don't think Russia and China is going to sneak any weapons in there? You don't think they're going to be carrying AK-47s, mortars, everything but the kitchen sink? Let's face it. Does the U.S. empire feel that it's necessary to arm Ukraine? Hey, we're giving them Leopard tanks and everything else. So you think Russia ain't going to look at it and say, West Africa, huh? I guess those people need some heavy weapons. They need machine guns. They need everything. They're ready to fight, and they're motivated to fight, and we're going to arm them. And then what? U.S. bases, how are they going to make out when there's mortar rounds coming over the wall every night? How are they going to make out when every time they try to have to go around to resupply? There's people putting up IEDs and spraying machine gun fire and AK-47 7.62 millimeter rounds at them all day long. They ain't going to be able to stay there because the Russians will, and Chinese too probably, but definitely the Russians will damn sure arm them the hell out of them. Wagner will be there training them, arming them as what's the term they use? Military advisors, things of that nature. So now France is going to be in a position where they're going to have to use force. And if they're able to, imagine that. You got to use force in West Africa, and you got to use force to stay there. And you got millions of people that don't want you there. And Russia's going to load them up with arms. I may be wrong. But I think Russia will load them up with arms. And guess what? Now, someone else said, yeah, America will arm them as well. Yeah. Arm whom? Arm them as well. America will arm them. So the Russians are going to arm the people. Let's just say Niger, Gabon, Mali. So let's just say France bombs them, and they're able to take the presidential palace and put some puppet supposedly in power, right? Okay. And all the people in the country want them the hell out. And Russia starts arming these people. I mean, you say America's going to arm them. Arm whom? Who are they going to arm in Mali? Who are they going to arm in Gabon when the people there want them out? The only thing the U.S. and France can do is put in their own troops, and their troops will be under assault. So is U.S. and France going to go to permanent war all over West Africa just so they can keep taking the stuff out of the mines? Might I ask you this? It's the West Africans that work. It's going to work in the mines. If the West Africans say, "Look, we want you the hell out of our country," no, we're going to bomb. We're going to take back over. Now we're in charge again. Go work in the mines. The West Africans saying, "Kiss my ass. I ain't working in no mines. Mine them yourself." Oh, by the way, you're going to mine them under fire. So what are they going to do now? They're going to maintain control of all of these West African countries through military control, and they're going to have to bring in people from other countries to work the mines. And guess what? They're going to be under fire the whole time because the people of West Africa are going to be armed to the friggin' teeth. I don't see, it's not possible. One of the reasons the U.S. has never invaded Venezuela is because a lot of people in Venezuela are armed to the teeth. The government has a basically, you might say, deputized. When you go to Venezuela, the tan uniform. The military has a green uniform. A lot of people have these tan uniforms. Been there, I can tell you about that. The government arms them to the teeth and says, "You're part of our militia. If anybody invades, we're going to fight. You know, you're armed, you can fight them," right? I mean, I've gone to Venezuela, little teeny women in the villages in the mountains shaking their fists. "You tell the Americans we will fight for our democracy." America can't go to Venezuela because you can't stay there. There'll be little women in the villages firing at you behind trees. They will cut you to pieces with weapons. And you can believe me that Russia would be arming the hell out of them too. The U.S. knows they can't go to Venezuela. They can't occupy Venezuela because they'll be chewed. You know, what are you going to do? You're going to live constantly under fire. Now it gets to the point. It's one thing to have 850 bases around the world. It's another to say we're going to occupy Venezuela, a country of 30 million. We're going to occupy Burkina Faso. We're going to occupy Mali. We're going to occupy Gabon. We're going to occupy the world. You're going to occupy the entire global South because the country starts saying we ain't going to do what you want anymore. It ain't going to happen. Not going to happen. So they're in a position where, in starting this battle in Ukraine, they created they created the fertile ground for revolution. You see, the tinder was already there. All it needed was a spark. All it needed was somebody like Ibrahim Traore to go to the summit in Russia, to meet with Putin, and at the summit stand up and say, "A slave who does not revolt should not be pitied." He asked the question, why the hell are we so rich in resources and so poor in money, going around the world begging? That those days are over, and those days are over. And now the world is going in a different direction, and God bless the Africans for standing up, fighting, and pushing back and refusing to deal with to allow the French, etc., to do them dirty anymore and steal their resources. And the future is looking bright for Africa. And might I add, for West Africa, and might I add, think about this. If the U.S. tried that, let's say France, the U.S. goes, we're going to bomb West Africa, right? We're going to blow it up. We're going to do carpet bomb areas. We're going to kill lots of people. They're heading down to Libya. And they're going to go through Libya. The border's a mess. And tens of millions of West Africans are going to end up in Europe. You think you got people coming in? See, the issues now, a lot of the Europeans get mad at the immigrants. The immigrants are there as a result of the neocon destabilization of their countries and their regions. The neocons destabilize their countries and their regions, and they go looking for someplace else, and they end up in Europe. Libya, and Gaddafi said, "Man, you overthrow this country, and there's been a whole lot of people showing up on your shores." And of course, the neocons were like, "Oh, that sounds like cheap labor to me. Let's do this." But you haven't even seen anything. Can you imagine if there was a war in all of West Africa? If France and the US did what they're trying to do, what they're trying to get away with, and they ended up at war with Mali, with Burkina Faso, with Gabon, with Niger, on and on and on. Then, of course, look at Senegal right now. In Dakar. Look at Senegal right now. People are running around in the streets shooting. They're unhappy with the government. That country will fall. If the war goes into spread there, that country will fall. Nigeria, the former drug dealer from Chicago that's now the president, I think his head's gone. I think literally his head's going to be rolling around on the street. And 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 um Nigeria fall. And what you will have is a gigantic destabilization of Africa and tens of millions of war refugees and displaced people showing up in Europe, and Europe cannot handle that. There's no way, and that's it. At that point, the people of Europe are going to go bonkers. If they're going to go insane. I'm going to add this. The way Ukraine's going, at some point, it's going to collapse into chaos. And when it does, you're going to have a whole lot of Ukrainians, millions of Ukrainians. They're going to flood off into Europe. They're going to cross Poland and Hungary, you name it. They're going to be heading at some point. And so there you have little old Europe sitting there. From Eastern Europe, you got millions of Ukrainians pouring down from the east into Europe. From Africa, you got tens of millions of Africans pouring down through Libya into Europe, and Europe will just become a basket case. There is no region of the world that can handle refugees like that. It can handle those numbers of refugees, a few refugees, yeah, but Europe can barely handle the number of refugees they got now that are as a result of neocons destabilizing various regions of the world. If they do this thing in Africa, tens of millions of Africans, tens of millions coming down in the winter. Oh, what a mess. And you know what? They ain't going to be happy. They're going to be hungry. They're going to be angry. And they're going to say, you guys in Europe, you're the ones that came to our country. You're the ones that took our stuff for the last century. And you're the ones that are now bombing and destabilizing our region. We ain't going nowhere. And we're pissed at you. We ain't happy. It's it for Europe. Done. Game, set, match. Close. Somebody turn out the light and put the flag down when you leave. Because Europe at that point is done. It's done as it is now economically. It's just going to be a wasteland. But you open that floodgate of 10 or 20 million West African refugees because Macron and the neocons are bombing the hell out of West Africa. It's over for you. That's it. Can you imagine if you live in Europe? 10 million refugees, a million showing up per country, a million, 2 million people showing up. Just, hey, we're there. We don't speak the language. We ain't got no money. We can't really, we don't have jobs. We don't know what we're going to do. We're desperate. That's it for your country. Blech, done. So I'm saying that all of this is as a result of the Ukraine conflict. If the Ukraine conflict doesn't happen, all this stuff doesn't happen. So you can thank Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland and the neocons for this, Europeans. And in the long run, it's going to work out well for Africa. And I'm in the long run, I mean, over the next 50 to 100 years, even once this conflict is resolved, and it will be. And I'm not going to, maybe the word resolved is the wrong term. Once this conflict runs its course, I believe the Europeans are going to try their best to get back on some kind of a good footing, because they're going to at some point realize they've been had. And you're going to see a lot of Viktor Orban style politicians winning and ruling things in Europe. I think that's my prediction. You're getting a bunch of Orban people type people, because they're, John Conyers, who I knew well, Congressman Conyers, and he was kind of a mentor to me. I used to talk to him, interview him a lot. And he used to say, don't forget, Garland, when you fight City Hall, City Hall is going to fight back. And so there's going to be pushback in both ways. There's going to be revolution and counter-revolution. But in Europe, there will be, right now you've got the neoliberal revolution, the neoliberal power dynamic, and they are so bad. They are so screwed up. They are so horrible at running things that there will be a revolution. And I think there'll be Orban types. And I think, and this is unfortunate, they pushed, for instance, the whole rainbow flag agenda, right? Where, like, people like me, I believe everybody should be treated the same. I don't think somebody who's gay or whatever should be treated differently or have less rights. However, the neocons have used that issue as a cultural issue to beat us over the head, so they can say, if you're not you know, trying to push that issue all over the place, if you're not trying to make that like one of the principal issues of our culture, then you hate gay people. Not that you're like me, that you think, I think everybody should have the same expectations of rights, but I don't think we should be aggressively and assertively pushing any lifestyles. Let people choose their lifestyles, or let people, however their lifestyle happens to be, however it came about, so fine. Treat them right, treat them fair. Everybody gets the same treatment, but don't go around screaming that one's lifestyle is superior or should be pushed as the best or favored lifestyle. Nah, let people live their lives. And the fact that they're doing so much to push the whole rainbow flag thing is going to, sadly and unfortunately, cause a blowback on people who are, you know, I believe there will be at some point blowback against gay people, innocent gay people who are just trying to live their lives. There's going to be some pushback against them. There could be an anti-gay agenda that is enacted in various Western parts of the world, where you get the inevitable counter revolution against that. And that's unfortunate, because what we really should be saying is, look, everybody gets treated the same. Leave people the hell alone and let them live their lives. Don't discriminate against them, but don't go screaming and running around saying everybody has to, everybody has to be um, see the whole rainbow flag thing as this is the wondrous and perfect direction for our cultures to go. No, it's part of reality. Leave it alone and let it be part of reality. There's nothing wrong with that. Just leave it alone. Let it be part of reality and move forward. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be a counter revolution that will be unfortunate, and there will be pushback as a result of that. That's probably going to last for some years, if not decades. So at any rate, thanks a lot, everybody. Let's see. It's what some people call it rainbow flag imperialism, where they simply use, it's like they use gay people as human shields so that they can come up with an excuse and pretend that they're doing the right thing and pretend that they're being fair to everybody. And they use that to do their imperialism and their colonialism and terrible things around the world. And they use that to shield themselves, shield themselves, saying, yes, but we're happy and down. We're down with gay people, so we couldn't possibly be evil. And unfortunately, I think there'll be pushback on that. Okay. Sparky says, one of my brothers knew Ambassador Stevens. He said Stevens was noticeably passionate in his support of Mandela and Gaddafi's vision for Africa. It's likely one reason he wasn't rescued. Interesting. All right, let's go next. Sparky, make Ukraine rush again. Thank you, Spark. How about we go right here? Sparky says, build a better world with BRICS. Eric says, in the last 10 years, the United States has done coups in Honduras, Haiti, Bolivia, Peru, tried Venezuela, and did it legally in Brazil. That's right. That's right. Nermeen Alareza, Citizens of the Jungle Unite. Thanks for your excellent work, Garland. Thank you. How about we say, Ari Magoo. Thank you, Ari. Juliet Leak. Thanks a lot, Juliet. Love Juliet. She's awesome. Eric, Mexican president made a referendum asking people if they want him out at the middle of his administration. Of course, he was voted to stay. Oh, I love AMLO. He's great. Sparky, how dare Gabon disrespect Emmanuel Jupiter Macron and Victoria Miss Congeniality Newland. Eon Moon, thank you very much. And that's that. Let's go to Rockford. And Dick on Rockford says, there's nothing more annoying and boring than the French in Morocco, chain smoking their spliffs and talking about 4x4s. Quattro. He says, there can't be that many Ukrainians left. Polish farmers with a wife and plow can repopulate Lvov like old times, a beautiful Baroque patrimonial city. I hope there is no war there. All right. Well, that's it, everybody. Thanks a lot. Might I add, if you would be so kind, I can't go on Twitter anymore. You know what's happening. I'm sure you've seen what's happening with Garland Nixon on Twitter. I am working towards how I'm going to address that. And I am going to address it. As you probably know by now, Garland Nixon pays Twitter for a verified account. There's a blue checkmark account with my name that says Garland Nixon, and it's verified, and I pay for that. They took the money out of my bank account for an entire year and then sent me an email that said, well, we can't verify that this is your account, Garland. Well, you can verify that you can take the money out of my account. For some reason, I paid for that account, but that's what Twitter says. They can't verify verified accounts. Well, that kind of sounds like deceptive practices, doesn't it? Well, so if you would be so kind as to share these videos of mine on your Twitter accounts, on all your social media accounts, it would be highly appreciated. Thank you very much. Don't forget, buymeacoffee.com is an option. If you can just buy Garland a coffee, it's $5 or as many as you want. And Buy Me a Coffee is like Patreon now. It's great. You can now do the monthly thing and you can say, hey, I want to buy Garland a monthly coffee at $5, and boom, you can do a subscription on Buy Me a Coffee. Of course, you can do Patreon. And you can do I've got my Cash App information scrolling across. There's PayPal, that's an option. So thanks for anybody who can donate to the channel. My guy is back in town today, so we are going to start next week working on turning this stinking, which once was a bedroom, into a real studio. How about that? And you have paid for it and are still paying for it as you donate. So I really appreciate that. Can't wait to get the new studio up and going. If you can, go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. It costs nothing to become a member. Become a member of my Rockfin channel. And of course, last but not least, if you can afford it, you can become a subscriber on Rockfin. It's $14.99 a month. Or if you sign up for a year, they give you a couple free months. I would really appreciate it if you can help support the channel on Rockfin. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.